Turn with me, if you would, to 1 Corinthians chapter 9. 1 Corinthians chapter 9. Now, this sermon is a little weird, and I feel a little awkward in preaching it, but it's one of the good things about doing exegetical preaching, where you preach all the way through a book. What it does is it protects you guys a little bit. It protects you from my preferences. If I had my preference, I would preach about the things that are fun to preach about all the time, and I wouldn't preach about anything that was difficult, because who wants to preach about difficult stuff? Let's just have fun, right? And that wouldn't be good for you guys, because you would hear the same, 9 topics every week for 52 weeks a year. It's also a protection for me, because there are times where I am going to have to preach through a topic that I wouldn't necessarily want to, but I can say it's not because I'm trying to say something in particular to one individual. It's because it's what the Word of God says. And if you don't like what I have to say, I can just say, talk to him. See, it's good that way. This morning is going to be kind of that way. Paul is talking about the value and the way that a church should treat their vocational ministers, those that have devoted their lives to the teaching and the spiritual leadership of others. Now, in his day, he was talking about himself and Barnabas and the apostles and that sort of thing. In today's day, who do you think what's the best application for that today? Pastors, right? Right, so the reason why I probably wouldn't normally choose to preach this sermon is because I don't like to get up and self-advocate. I don't do that very well. I don't say, well, you should treat me this way or this. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to preach this sermon as if I'm a guest speaker at a different church. Okay? Because then I can go ahead and deliver the truth, and you guys can pretend like I'm somebody else. I'm going to pretend like you're somebody else, and I'm going to give some examples of some of my experience in my 24 years of full-time pastoring. And if you find yourself in that example, just assume I'm talking about somebody else. All right? That's the only way we're going to get through this. Right? Now, turn with me to 1 Corinthians chapter 9. I entitled this sermon, Trading Rights for Rewards, but we're going to read the entire chapter, and we're going to see what Paul has to say about how churches and their ministers should relate to each other. And so let's, as is our custom, would you stand with me as we read God's word together? If you don't have your Bibles with you, we're going to also put this up on the screen for you, and I'm going to be reading out of the New American Standard Version. So starting in verse 1, chapter 9. Am I not free? Am I not an apostle? Have I not seen Jesus our Lord? Are you not my work in the Lord? If to others I am not an apostle, at least I am to you, for you are the seal of my apostleship in the Lord. My defense to those who examine me is this: do we not have a right to eat and drink? Do we not have a right to take along a believing wife, even as the rest of the apostles and the brothers of the Lord and Cephas? Or do only Barnabas and I not have a right to refrain from working? Who at any time serves as a soldier at his own expense? Who plants a vineyard and does not eat the fruit of it? Or who tends a flock and does not use the milk of the flock? I am not speaking these things according to human judgment, am I? Or does not the law also say these things? For it is written in the law of Moses, you shall not muzzle the ox while he is threshing. God is not concerned about oxen, is he? Or is he speaking altogether for our sake? Yes, for our sake it was written, because the plowman ought to plow in hope, and the thresher to thresh in hope of sharing the crops. If we sowed spiritual things in you, is it too much if we reap material things from you? If others share the right over you, do we not more? Nevertheless, we did not use this right, but we endure all things so that we will cause no hindrance to the gospel of Christ. Do you not know that those who perform sacred services eat the food of the temple, and those who attend regularly to the altar have their share from the altar? So also the Lord directed those who proclaim the gospel to get their living from the gospel. But I have used none of these things. And I'm not writing these things so that it will be done so in my case, for it would be better for me to die than have any man make my boast an empty one. For if I preach the gospel, I have nothing to boast of, for I am under compulsion, for woe is me if I do not preach the gospel. For if I do this voluntarily, I have a reward, but if against my will, I have a stewardship entrusted to me. What then is my reward? That when I preach the gospel, I may offer the gospel without charge, so as not to make full use of my right in the gospel. For though I am free from all men, I have made myself a slave to all, so that I may win more. To the Jews I became as a Jew, so that I might win Jews. To those who are under the law as under the law, though not being myself under the law, so that I might win those who are under the law. To those who are without law as without law, though not being without the law of God, but under the law of Christ, so that I might win those who are without law. To the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all men, so that I may by all means save some. I do all things for the sake of the gospel, so that I may become a fellow partaker of it. Do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but only one receives the prize? Run in such a way that you may win. Everyone who competes in the games exercises self-control in all things. They then do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an unperishable one. Therefore I run in such a way as not without aim. I box in such a way as not beating the air, but I discipline my body and I make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified. Would you bow with me for a word of prayer? Heavenly Father, as we examine this passage of Scripture, Lord, I pray that each one of us would see the role that we play, the role that our leaders play, Lord, our pastors and our ministers, and Lord, that we would understand how you have designed this teamwork, this coming together. You know, those that serve, those that support, those that teach, those that learn, Lord, how you've brought us together and according to your will, you've called us to be this thing called church. And so, Lord, I thank you and I praise you for the instruction and the wisdom that you share with us. It's in your holy name I pray. Amen. You may be seated. So what do we start with? Paul starts with a few kind of rhetorical questions. He starts with some, hey, here, let me give you the Keith Harris version of what Paul is saying here. Aren't we human too? You know, it's amazing to me how people sometimes react when they find out that their pastor is a human being. I had this just last night. We had our fantasy football draft party last night. And I was, Mario was back there going, whoa, yeah. And when I'm in football mode, I get a little bit more competitive. I was a football coach for 10 years. I was a Texas high school football player, and we took it serious down in Texas, y'all. I want you to understand that. I set a Texas state record my junior year that still holds to today. I lived and breathed football, and I allowed myself, when I put that helmet on, I became a different person. When the helmet was off, I was like, oh, here, let me help you up and everything. When I put the helmet on, I was like, I'm taking your head off. Let's go. You were dumb enough to step in front of me, buddy. Right? And so I don't get to do that anymore. I don't put the helmet on anymore. But when I put my jersey on for the fantasy football draft last night, and I kind of went into competitive mode a little bit. And I remember Mario kind of looked at me like, dang, this is a new side of pastor I've never seen. It's like, yeah, I'm human too, right? You know, but it's been funny to me how sometimes people think that a pastor, a leader somehow sets aside all of their humanity and they become this pious individual all the time that always does this. Guys, we're human. And it's always going to be that way, which means we're going to make mistakes. We're going to have selfish desires. We're going to have all the bad things that come with being human, but we also enjoy all the same things that other people enjoy as well. Right? He says, am I not free? Am I not an apostle? He says, do I not have the right to eat and drink? Do I not have the right to take along a believing wife? Now, Paul was unmarried, as was Barnabas at this time, but he was saying, if I wanted to, couldn't I go and get married and start a family and that sort of thing? Or have I given that up when I answered the call to God? Sometimes as church people, we forget that our leaders are human, and then by extension, sometimes we don't give the grace that is necessary to the family of the pastors either. My wife and my kids will tell you it is difficult growing up in a pastor's home. And it's not just because everything you do gets used as a sermon illustration, which is true, but it's not just that. My kids have grown up under a microscope all the time. Anytime they made a mistake, well, you shouldn't be doing that. You're a pastor's kid. I'll tell you what, my biggest rebellion in my life was because I was sick of hearing that. And I decided one day on the school bus, you know what? I'm going to prove to you just how much like you I really am. As a matter of fact, I'm going to lead the way in rebellion, and you guys are going to look to me as an example of how bad we can be. Because I was so tired of being judged because I wasn't allowed to be a regular human being as a pastor's kid. It's one of the reasons why I ran from my calling for so long, because I didn't want to become my father, and I didn't want to put my family through the same things. Because we, as a church, we don't allow our leaders to be human. So he says, am I not human? Am I not the same thing? Are we not free to partake in this? To partake in life. So Paul starts off with, if it's okay for you, is it not okay for me? Is answering the call of leadership on your life giving up everything? And too many people assume that it is. So many people are shocked and shaken when they find out their pastor is human, just like them. Then he goes on to say, we are justified in accepting support. Look at verse 6. He says, or do only Barnabas and I not have the right to refrain from working? Who at any time serves as a soldier at his own expense? If you serve as a soldier, you are paid to be a soldier. It becomes your life. You don't have to have a regular job in order to and then serve in that same capacity. It's the same kind of thing. He says we are justified. Paul makes a case for this financial support of religious professions. And then he breaks that down for us. He says, first of all, it makes sense. Look at verse 7. Who at any time serves as a soldier at his own expense? Who plants a vineyard and does not eat the fruit of it? Or who tends a flock and does not use the milk of the flock? He said, I'm not speaking these things according to human judgment, or does not the law also say these things? He says, and he quotes an Old Testament passage here. He says, you shall not muzzle the ox while he is threshing. Now, that sentence may not make any sense to us. So let me describe a little bit what that was. A threshing floor they would set this thing up, and they had a large stone. They would throw the wheat down onto the floor. They would have this large stone that they would roll over, and what it would do is it would break up the chaff and the little protection around the individual grain kernels. And then once it was threshed, then you could separate them. They would often, have you ever seen in the old movies or something, they're taking a pitchfork and they're throwing the wheat up in the air on a windy day? What they're doing is they're separating the chaff from the wheat, because the chaff is lighter and it flies away in the wind and the grain falls back down. Right? But it has to be threshed before you can do that. Well, the way they would do that is they would hook up an oxen, a large cow type thing, right? And the oxen would be on this thing, and he would pull the stone. He would walk around in a circle, and he would pull the stone around over top of all the grain, and that's what would break up the outer husks, right? What he's talking about here is he says, you do not muzzle the ox. In other words, you let the guy that's doing the work of pulling the stone around reach down and eat the grain when he's hungry. You don't put a muzzle on it. What he's talking about here is he's saying, listen, you let the person who's doing the work gain some of the reward from the work. It makes practical sense. It's a biblical principle that God has established. The Bible makes a case for fair compensation for those who serve. He goes on to say in verses 10 through 14, it's a mutually beneficial trade. He says there, is he speaking for our sake? Because he's not really talking just about the oxen, right? He says, yes, it is for our sake it was written, because the plowman ought to plow in hope, and the thresher ought to thresh in hope of sharing the crops. If we sowed spiritual things in you, is it too much if we reap material things from you? In other words, he's making the case here that your pastors, your leaders, your vocational leaders are putting the effort in and the work in to provide a spiritual service for you. And if someone is providing a service for you, are they not entitled to compensation for that? Now, we do that in all other aspects in our lives, don't we? If you don't know how to plumb, if you're not a plumber and you need to hire someone who knows how to do those things and you bring him into your home, do you just say, hey, thanks for that and see you later? Does he volunteer his time? No. I don't know what plumbers make an hour, but I know it's better than what I make an hour, right? But any kind of service, anything that you can't do yourself and you bring someone else in who has that skill. And I love that there was a Facebook post I saw one time about how people often, they balk at the prices of contractors and that sort of thing. It's like, oh, I want you to come build a deck for me. Okay, well, it's going to be $2,000. What? Why does it have to be so much? He's like, well, okay, well, I can teach you. You can do it yourself. Well, I don't know how to do it yourself. Tell you what, I can teach you how to do it for, let's say, $300. Okay, yeah, why don't you teach me how to do it? Okay, well, first of all, you need to get out your skill saw, your chop saw, and your table saw. Well, I don't have those things. Okay, well, I can rent you mine, right? And by the time they're done by the time he does it himself, he's paying the $2,000. There is something to be said for paying materially for a service that you cannot provide yourself. Now, is that true in today's world? Again, I'm pretending like you're not my church. You're supposed to pretend like I'm not your pastor. Is the service that you get from having a pastor worth compensating? Because are they doing something that you wouldn't normally do yourself? I don't know how much people really understand what it takes to be a pastor. I'm going to give you two examples, two stories. And again, don't hear yourself in this story. I'm talking about someone else, Jose. First story is kind of a comical one. Number one, I hate group texts. Oh, I absolutely loathe them and despise them. If you put me in a group text, just know I will look at the texts, but I will hate you a little bit every time my phone goes off. I hate group text. And here's why. We were in a men's ministry group text in one of my churches, right? And there's a couple of people in that group text that just love sending emojis to each other, right? Somebody will say something and somebody will send an emoji, and then somebody will send another emoji, and then you end up with two guys that are trying to out-emoji each other. And they've even got this special app where they have these little cartoon characters that look just like them, and they're always going like, yeah, and I'm going, where do you get this stuff? The problem is, for everyone else in the group text, my phone is and my text message alert sounds like a Navy submarine sonar. It's short, it's loud enough I can hear from my pocket, and it just goes boing, and then that's it. And I've had the same sound for the last 25 years. As a matter of fact, Friday night on the radio, my wife texted me and she said, I can hear your phone going off over the air. You might want to silence it, because she could hear through the microphone my phone going bling, bling, and she said, I'll know that sound from anywhere, right? Well, here's the problem. When these guys get into these emoji wars, my phone is blowing up. And I keep telling them, guys, if you're going to do that, can you do that privately between the two of you? I said, I don't want my phone blowing up all the time. He says, and they kept saying, well, just ignore it. Just turn it off. I tell, there's another situation, the same kind of thing. Some guys get up at like 4 o'clock in the morning because they got to be at work at 5. And so they go ahead and text the group text at 5:30 in the morning. Again, I don't know who that might be talking about, Lenny. And it's like, man, some of us don't get up that early. So I try to say, hey, please keep it between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m., that kind of thing. Because, and I get the same thing, well, just turn it off. And I tell them, I said, listen, you may have the ability to do that. I said, but I'm a pastor. I'm on call 24/7. I don't get to just turn my phone off. Because when somebody loses a loved one, when somebody ends up in the hospital, when something bad happens to their family, they expect their pastor to pick up the phone. And I do. It's a little different for a pastor. It's a little different for pastors. You need to understand that. That was something that people don't get. It's say, listen, there's a trade-off. There's something that pastors commit to and they become a part of. Is that worth something? And I spent so much time on that first story, I can't remember what the second story was. Maybe the next service will get the second story instead. It's mutually beneficial. Vocational ministry makes many things possible for those that they minister to. I had somebody ask me one time, they said, well, don't pastors just work on Sundays? Boy, I wish that were true, right? I remember one time I preached a sermon, and I was talking about the second coming of Christ. I was talking about how Jesus was coming back, and it was about the same time that the Lord of the Rings movies were coming out, and it was right before the third installment, The Return of the King, came out, and I found a movie poster that said Return of the King, and I used that in my PowerPoint, and I made mention as the picture was up there. I turned and I said, I got this off the internet. That turned into a rumor that I download all my sermons off the internet and I just recycle what other people say, and which fit into the rumor that pastors only work on Sundays. You only work 1 to 2 days a week. Why do we have to pay you a full-time salary? That one is both insulting and hilarious at the same time, right? It's hilarious that you think that's the way it works. But it's also insulting at the same time as well. You guys, I don't want you to take lightly what it means. He's saying here there's a mutually beneficial trade-off here. A pastor is providing a service to the church that is not provided in any other way, shape, or form. He goes on to say, he moves on from there. He says there in verse 14, so also the Lord directed those who proclaim the gospel to get their living from the gospel. Is it a fair expectation that a pastor be fairly compensated for his work? I'll tell you, and this truly was from a different church, but there was a guy in our church who truly believed whenever we would have our annual budget meetings, and that's when, we're very open about our budget. You can see exactly how much I get paid every year and all that kind of stuff. And he looked at it and he truly believed and he advocated for this. He said, I believe that pastors should live in poverty. I don't think we should pay him that much. He needs to be constantly reliant on the grace of God in order for him to be a good pastor. And that's the way my church operated for many years. My wife and I have been married 26 years. I am 46 years old, and we finally bought our first house 2 years ago because where we were living before, the median income was here, my income was here, because that's the way the church thought I was supposed to get paid. And God did take care of us, yes, but I couldn't afford to even live in the community in which I served. And I don't think that's right. I don't think that's what the Bible says, but it's one of those situations where it's like I was answering the call of God, so I wasn't going to say, hey, give me a raise or I'm out of here. And God did. God blessed us. God took care of us. But I don't think that's the way it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be fair, and it's a mutually beneficial thing. So then he goes on to say, this is the part where Paul says, okay, yes, I have the right to it, but I have waived that right. Just so you know, the pastor of this church is not waiving that right. My wife won't let me do that. Okay, no. Look at verse 15. He says, but I have used none of these things, and I am not writing these things so that it will be done so in my case, for it would be better for me to die than have any man make my boast an empty one. You see, I believe that Paul was given a specific, a unique calling, different than other ministers, different than other apostles, because God was planning to use him in such a powerful way. And he was saying, listen, I don't look for your compensation. I don't look for you to support me in that way because of my unique calling. Paul was in a position, Paul makes claims that I never would as a pastor. You know, he says, you should live as I do and you should look to me an example. I hope that I can be an example to other people in how to live because I'm doing the best I can, but I would never make such bold statements because I'm not Paul. Right? But Paul, in his unique situation, he says, I don't take advantage of any of those things because I would never want my boast, he even says that, I wouldn't want my boast to be taken away by the things of man. He did live but day by day by the grace of God so that he could make such bold statements. He says in verse 17, he says, I do this voluntarily, and if I do it voluntarily, I have this reward. And what is that reward? He says that when I preach the gospel without charge, so as to not make full use of my right in the gospel. Verse 19, for though I am free from all men, I have made myself a slave to all. You see, after making the case for why it would be justified, Paul explains why he has not required it. He voluntarily forgoes these rights so that he can be a burden to no one and he can give glory to God in everything that he does. Okay, and that's Paul's prerogative. And his reward is the greatest effectiveness of the gospel. That was his reward, that he could be the most effective. He could say, look how God has taken care of me. Look how God has provided for me. Look how I can be bold and I can go ahead and offend you with the truth because you aren't the one signing my paycheck. There's some freedom in Paul's situation, right? You know, that's why I said I'm going to pretend like I'm a guest speaker at someone else's church, because I can tell you the hard truths without having to worry about getting a bunch of emails later, right? Which, by the way, if you do have a problem, my email, again, I'll tell you again, wayne.harden@newliferifle.com, right? So he's saying here, you know, because I'm not looking to you to support me, I can be more bold in telling you the truth. And the reward is you get the pure, unfiltered, unwatered down gospel. Now, guys, I want you to know, I don't water down the gospel, but I do understand that there is a limit to how much I can step on your toes, right? You know, there are some times where I would love to just grab hold of some of y'all and shake you and do one of these and say, stop it, you're being stupid, right? But that doesn't work, right? You may not come back to church anymore, and I don't have the same effect. For some people, it might work better. Maybe I should try it, right? But I tell you what, if somebody ever sends me an emoji war again, I just might try it. But he says his reward is being the most effective in the gospel. You see, his strategy is to be as flexible as possible without compromising God's will to reach as many as he can. Look what he says there in verse 19. For though I am free, I've been made slave to all that I may win more. He said, to the Jews I became as a Jew so that I might win more Jews. To those under the law, I became under the law. To those outside of the law, I became outside of the law. He always qualifies it. He says, I can adapt to the group that I'm ministering to without compromising the truth of God's word, right? And I think that's an important point. If you read my newsletter article this week, which I know all of you did, I explained, because I've had a couple people here recently, guys, our climate, our social climate is becoming increasingly more political. Would you agree with that statement? much more divisive, much more you're either on this side or that side. Well, what do you believe about this? How can I pigeonhole you? I want to put you over here. I want to put you. And I've even had people in our church come to me and say, why aren't you preaching these political issues? This political stuff is the most important stuff in our world today. Why aren't you talking about it? Guys, I want you to understand something. I do have political beliefs, and in a private conversation, you can find out in about 4 seconds where I land. Right? But I will not, I refuse to use this pulpit. And guys, do you understand what I mean by use this pulpit? Is I refuse to use the influence and the when you say that I look at my calling as it's my job to tell you the word of God. I am not going to use that same platform to then spout off my opinion about politics. I just won't do it. Now, I'm going to teach you what it says in the Word of God, and there are some political issues that I believe all of us should be on one side or the other, because that's where this lands. And so that I'm not going to shy away from that. And if that offends you, I'm okay with offending you with the truth in God's Word. That's between you and God. That's not between you and me. Okay? But I'm not gonna put myself in that situation. Why? Because I want to be able to minister to those on this side of the aisle and those on this side of the aisle. I want to be able to help and lead and challenge, and I can't do that if I've completely run you off because I'm endorsing one candidate over another or saying one thing politically over the other. It's not my calling, right? I'm going to be neutral when it comes to politics so that I might be able to minister to all, regardless of politics, right? So that's what he's saying here. He said, I'm willing to adapt. To the weak, I became weak so that I could reach some. He said, I do all things for the sake of the gospel so that I may become a fellow partaker in it. You see, his strategy was to be as flexible as possible without compromising God's will so that he could reach as many as he possibly can. And I think that's important. I think that's an important part of what pastors today are called to be and to do. You know, I think it's so sad when I hear people tell stories about how they've gone to churches and they did not feel welcome because they weren't dressed the right way or they looked the wrong way. I had one lady one time, I kid you not, it was in a previous church, not this church. She asked me, she said, hey, Pastor, this may sound weird, but can I take a picture of you? I was like, okay, why? And she said, well, my daughter, she lives over in Indiana, and she doesn't think that she can go to church because she has tattoos and piercings and that kind of thing, and she doesn't believe she'll be welcome in a church, and she doesn't believe me when I told her that I found a church where the pastor looks like you. And I said, okay. She said, so I want to take your picture, and I'm going to send it to her as proof. And I was like, all right, I guess. And she goes, can you like, raise your hands up into the picture or something? I was like, what? She goes, I want to get your thumb rings in the picture too. And I was like, okay. Right? And so she took this picture because her daughter was convinced she had been to other churches and had been rejected because she didn't look the way they decided she was supposed to look. You know what? God doesn't care how we look on the outside. God cares what we are on the inside. And that's always been true, and it always will be true. He says, I became all things to all people for the sake of the gospel so that I might win a few. He goes on to say in verse 24 that he's working for the prize. He says, do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but only one receives the prize? Run in such a way that you may win. In other words, if you're going to serve, and I believe at this point he shifts from talking to the church folks to talking to the pastors a little bit. He says, hey, if you're going to do it to the best of your ability. Do it to the best that you can. He says, everyone who competes in the race exercises self-control in all things. If you're going to serve in ministry, if you're going to serve in leadership, that means you've got to get some control over your life. You got to have some self-control. That means there are some things that you need to stop doing. There's some things that you need to start doing. And believe it or not, starting good habits can often be more difficult than stopping bad ones. I heard a comedian say one time, he said, the only thing harder than stopping smoking was starting flossing. He said that was starting that good habit was more difficult than stopping the bad one. And so that can be true for us as well. If we want to grow in our faith, there's some things we need to stop doing. There's some things we need to start doing. We need to start exercising self-discipline. He's using this example of an Olympic competitor. He's talking about winning the prize, the perishable prize, the little crown that they would get when they would win. Even back in Paul's day, he's talking about they compete for that prize. He says their prize is perishable, ours is imperishable. He says, but if you're gonna do it to the same level. And you talk about an Olympic athlete, they are self-disciplined in all things. They go to bed at a certain time. They make sure they get the right kind of rest. They eat the right kind of foods. They don't get cheat days. I've been doing a carnivore diet, which is actually kind of fun. Somebody told me, they said, if you eat nothing but meat, eggs, and cheese, you can lose weight. I'm like, cool, that's 80% of my diet anyway. All right? I said, I'll just cut out the chips at night and cut out the carbs and everything. And I've lost a few pounds doing that and everything, but there's every once in a while, I have a cheat day. My wife was gone for a week. She was in Salt Lake City doing her annual training for the college that she works for. And my son has been house sitting for somebody else. So I have been a complete bachelor for the last 5 days. And I got to the point where I don't know, you usually think this is a womanly thing, right, Jeff? But all of a sudden, I decided I must have chocolate. I had been on steak and pork and cheese and eggs and everything for 8 days straight, and I needed some chocolate. I found my wife's stash for baking cookies. She had white chocolate chips and milk chocolate chips in the freezer. I didn't care. They'll melt in your mouth if you stick them in there long enough, right? So I busted those open, and that was my cheat day. Well, my wife found them on my little side table. The bags are half empty now. And she goes, is this on your little diet? And I was like, shut up, leave me alone. But that's self-discipline. Well, guys, I'm not talking about just your physical disciplines. If you want to be serving God, you've got to get some disciplines on your life. Some of us are emotionally undisciplined to the point where our emotions rule our lives. We've never told ourselves, I've got to stop doing that and I've got to start doing this. And we find ourselves being pulled back and forth by these slight offenses, or I can't believe she said that, or I can't believe this happened. And we allow ourselves to run amok emotionally because we've not exercised any kind of self-control. Guys, that will hinder your effectiveness for the kingdom of God, because you can't minister to people if you're always mad at them. Guys, one of the things I learned a long time ago as a pastor, I had to grow some Teflon skin. That means I had to let things wash off of me. Things said about me, things said about my wife, my kids. I had to just let it go because I still had to minister to that person, whether they offended me or not. You need to start exercising some self-control. He says, therefore, I run in such a way as not without aim. That means to that end, everything Paul does was intentional. It was intentional. He said, I run in such a way, I don't just run around willy-nilly. Have you ever seen little kids playing t-ball? It is one of the funniest, cutest things I've ever seen. But there's no point keeping score. Right? You get that kid, he cracks the ball, he's supposed to go to first. Instead, he runs and chases after the ball. Right? Thinking, I'll get it. It's like, no, you run to first. They run to third. They go all over the place. They're out there picking daisies. I saw one kid, I thought this video was hilarious. This kid decided he wanted to be on a living highlight reel. So as he was coming in from third, he went into slow-mo mode. And even the coach came over and was like, come on. And he would not be hurried. He was like, you're ruining it, man. I'm going to get on Sports Center. Right? Do we just run around? He says, I don't do things without aim. It should be intentional. You should think about things. I've learned as being a pastor, when somebody asks me a question, I've learned that the most trouble I've gotten into in my life is when I answer too quickly. I didn't take a moment to think about it. I didn't think about how it was going to be taken. I didn't think about how it was going to be an influence on them or this or that. And so there are times where sometimes when somebody sends me a text message or an email, understand I do get it because that phone, bring, it goes off. And once I figure out it's not it's not somebody else, I will answer that as soon as I can. But sometimes it's me thinking about my answer and praying about it because my knee-jerk reaction may not be the best for you or me. Because I want to be intentional about everything I do. Everything should be pointed. He says, I run in such a way as not without aim. I box in such a way as not beating the air. Think about a boxer. Have you guys ever seen, I saw a video of a bunch of blindfolded guys in a boxing ring. It was like a melee. There was like 6 of them, and they were supposed to be boxing. They're blindfolded. And the poor referee took at least 6 shots. I mean, they found a body, and they were like, he's like, no, this is the wrong guy, right? We don't just waste our efforts, right? Working and serving the Lord can be very hard work. You want to make sure that you're putting your efforts in the right places. He says he's very strategic. He said, I discipline my body and make it a slave so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified. See, everything that we do should be strategic so that it can be effective. You see, I could stand up here and every Sunday I could preach you the same message, preach about God's love. And guys, I've seen TV evangelists do this and everything. You know, every single one of their messages could probably be condensed down into one. Because it's always about, oh, God is love and he wants your best life now and all this stuff. It's all just this feel-good stuff and everything. And tell you what, that may be effective in drawing a crowd, but he's not pointing people to Christ very well. You want to be effective in your ministry because, guys, your life as a Christian is not going to be puppy dogs and rainbows all the time. You're going to have hardships. You're going to have those tough times. I want to be effective because I also understand that serving in ministry is difficult. All disciplines are difficult. Right? We go to the gym, we do exercise. Anybody who says they enjoy exercise, they're lying to you. They might enjoy the results of it, but nobody enjoys grunting and sweating and working hard and getting sore and tired. We understand that all discipline is difficult, but in the end, it is worth it if we run the race to win the race. How are you living your lives? How do you view those that serve you? I'll tell one story on Ben and Brandon. Brandon, our worship leader, previous youth pastor. His first job as youth pastor was in my church when we were doing a church plant. I was doing both the preaching and I was leading the youth ministry, and I needed some help. And these 2 young guys, they were still seniors in high school, but they said, hey, we want to come alongside and help. And I said, okay, how about this? You guys plan the activities for the youth. I'll do the teaching. And I said, and together we'll do this. And it was very quickly, I told them what needed to be done, and I kind of pushed them in the right direction, and then I watched them as they floundered for the first couple of weeks. I finally got back together with them, and I said, okay, guys, so let's think about what's going on. And Brandon looked at me, and he goes, you didn't tell me how hard this was going to be. And I said, yeah, you're a youth. You're used to just showing up when it starts and leaving when it ends and thinking it all just happens all that easily. I said, it's hard work, isn't it? He goes, I had no idea how much work it was going to be. Even little things. We did the fantasy football draft last night. Everybody showed up at 6. We ate snack food and everything. We drafted and everybody went home. I've been preparing for the draft for a week and a half. I was here at 5, getting things set up. I was here after everybody else, getting things cleaned up. I'm not saying that to complain. I love fantasy football. I love the camaraderie that comes with it, so it's worth it to me. But guys, we need to understand that serving is always more difficult than we think it's going to be. But it's worth it. The relationships, the effectiveness of the gospel is worth it. How are you approaching the calling that God has put on your life? How do you view those that serve? How do you view your pastors and your ministers and your leader? Have you made the mistake of not letting them be human? Have you made the mistake of judging them too harshly? Have you made the mistake of thinking that while I need to make this much amount every year, it's okay if he's poor? Have you made the mistake of not looking at the things that they do and seeing the value in the service that they provide? Maybe you need to reevaluate both what's going on in here and what's going on in here. Would you bow with me for a word of prayer? Heavenly Father, as we're here this morning, Lord, as we look at this passage of Scripture, Lord, I know that it is so easy to make assumptions about other people's lives. It is so easy to decide one thing, this or that, or to fill in the blanks when we don't have the right information. We fill in the blanks and then we operate with that as our truth. Lord, I pray that you would help us all to open up our eyes, open up our hearts. Lord, that we would see that this is a mutually beneficial partnership. Lord, that we look to those that are called to lead, and Lord, that we give them the benefit of the doubt in some ways. Lord, that we give them grace. Lord, that we offer them respect. Lord, for those of us that are in those positions of leadership, Lord, that we would run the race the right way. Lord, that we would get some self-control on some different areas of our lives, that we would start doing the right things and stop doing the wrong things. That we would lead in the best way that we can, so that we can be the most effective in reaching as many people as we can with the gospel of Jesus Christ. Lord, if there's somebody here today, maybe you've spoken to their heart in a different way. Lord, I know that you have the ability to speak through my words or sometimes around them. Lord, I pray that you would call that person to you, Lord, that they would be willing to follow, surrender to you, whatever it is that you're calling them to. Lord, I thank you and I praise you for this opportunity that we've been given. In your name I pray. Amen. I'm going to ask you to stand with us. We're going to sing a song of invitation. If God has spoken to your heart, maybe you need to come to the altar, surrender something. Maybe you need to ask a question or seek prayer. I invite you to do that as we sing.